Hey guys, and welcome to Gwent, the Witcher card game. My name is Jaggerous, and today we're going to be checking out the Monsters starter deck, as well as doing some cheap upgrades in order to make you guys a better version so you can have more luck on the ladder. So if you are new to Gwent, then fear not, for I am here to help you. Before I jump into what these cards are and how they all work, I want to talk to you a little bit about the deck builder, just so you understand what's going on a little bit. This up here is the count of cards in your deck. So currently we have 25 cards, which is the minimum. If we take out Geralt of Rivia, it goes down to 24. If we put him back in, back up to 25. And I really do recommend playing 25 cards in your deck and not more than that, because if you play more than that, you make each individual card weaker because of the provision system, and you also mean that you're less likely to draw your good cards. So what is the provision system? Well, when you build decks in Gwent, you have a provision cost, which is like your deck building cost. So every card has a power, this case 3, and a provision value, in this case 10. So if we put this card into our deck, it will cost us 10 provisions. The number of provisions you have available is equal to 150 plus the bonus you get from your leader. So in this instance, we're getting 16 bonus provisions by running Carapace. However, if you wanted to play Fruits of Isgith, you'd only get 11. So you have fewer provisions to work with. This number here is how many provisions are left in your deck or available. So if we take Geralt out, that will jump up by 10 provisions. Now we have 32 provisions. And if we put Geralt back in, you can see down to 22. And the starter decks, they are a little bit undercosted. We do have some provisions to work with, but that does make them a little bit easier to upgrade because you don't have to worry too much about provisions. The last number here is the number of units in your deck. You can see we have 21 units. If we take out Geralt, we only have 20 units. We put him back in, we have 21. And there is a minimum number of units in your deck, so make sure that you got your nice little green tick here. So don't just make spell-only decks. That's not going to work. So let's talk about the deck. Every deck has a ability, and you can change the ability, but they are specific to your faction. So the starting ability that you get here is Carapace. What this does is you have 2 charges, so you can use this twice across the game. Maybe in round 1, maybe in round 3, maybe twice in one round. That's up to you. And what this does, it will boost an allied unit by 3, so you gain 3 value, and it will give it a shield. Shield will block the next instance of damage. So if it's got a shield and it takes 1 damage, the 1 damage is blocked. If it's got a shield and it takes 10 damage, the 10 damage is blocked, but only 1 instance. So if someone did 10 damage, or 1 damage 10 times, it's only going to block 1 damage. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Next up, we have some cards. So let's look at our cards. And we're going to start down here at the bottom with the bronzes. We have the Necker. Necker is a 1 strength unit with Thrive. What Thrive does is this unit will get stronger or boosted by 1 whenever you play an ally with higher power. So if we play this down on the board, little 1s, bear in mind it does spawn a friend. So he creates a friend next to him that doesn't come out of your deck. The little 1s there, let's say we play a 3 strength unit. They will then buff up by 1 to 2 strength. At which point we then have to play higher than 2 strength if we want to trigger the Thrive again. So when you're sequencing your cards, in terms of choosing how you want to play them, you want to play your Neckers and then you want to gradually play cards of more power in order to trigger Thrive as often as possible. Next up, we have the Arcaspore. When you play this, it will damage a random enemy by 2. It also has a Death Wish. Death Wishes will trigger when the card is destroyed. So when it dies, then it depletes the deployability, so we damage a random enemy unit by 2 again. And you might think, why would I want to destroy my units? But you have cards like Seleno Harpy. And what Seleno Harpy does is it consumes an allied unit. So when you do this, you destroy a unit, you eat it, but you also boost by its power. So you take those 2 points of value from the Arcaspore and put them onto the Harpy, making it a 7, and then you also trigger the Death Wish, which is quite nice. And the other card you want to use this with here is the Harpy Egg. So this also has a Death Wish. It's a 3-point egg, but when it dies, it spawns a 5-point Harpy onto the row. So if you consume the egg, and eggs are a great source of protein, then you will then get the Harpy hatching out of the egg onto the board. Okay, next up we have the Wild Hunt Navigator. Deploy, boost an allied unit by 1. Dominance, boost it by 3 instead. So what dominance is when you have largest value unit on your side of the board. And if it's a tie, maybe you have an 8 on your side of the board and your opponent also has an 8, dominance will still trigger. However, dominance only triggers for other units. So if the board was completely empty and I played the Wild Hunt Navigator, well, first of all, I wouldn't have a target, so that would not be very smart. But this dominance effect wouldn't trigger because it has to be when you control another unit. So just be a little bit aware of that going forward. Speaking of dominance, we also have the Wild Hunt Rider. When we play this, if we have dominance, so if we have the largest unit on our side of the board, you can summon a copy of this unit from your deck. So this will pull the other Wild Hunt Rider out of your deck and onto the board. So when you're mulliganing, when you're choosing which cards to keep and which to put back into the deck, make sure you only have one Wild Hunt Rider. And summon is different from spawn. So if we look at the NECA, NECAs will spawn, which means they create, they add a card to the game, whereas summon means to bring from your deck or from the graveyard. Some cards do that. Next up, got a couple Howlers Thunders here. These allow us to damage a unit by 5. It's just a little zap, which is quite nice for removing things that are a problem. We have a couple Ghouls. These, if you play them on the melee row, that's the front row. The back row is the range row. We consume a bronze unit in our graveyard. So we look in our graveyard and we find a unit that is bronze and we consume it, so we boost by its power. And you know what's a good unit to consume? The Ice Giant. Ice Giant has 7 strength, no ability, but if you play this, say on round 1, it'll go into your graveyard, and then in round 2 or round 3, you can then play the Ghoul, eat the Ice Giant from the graveyard, and gain power. But by eating it from the graveyard, it does get removed from the graveyard, so you can't eat the same Ice Giant twice. You know, that doesn't make any sense. Next up, we have Alpha Werewolf. This is another Thrive unit, so boosting when you play units that are bigger than it. But it's also immune, which means that it cannot be manually targeted. But what that means is you can't target it either. So your opponent can't target it to deal damage, but also I can't target it to add boosts, say with the Wild Hunt Navigator. Although, if an ability does something to a random unit, then this can trigger and hit the Werewolf, and similarly things like row effects, so Lacerate damages all units on a row by 2, which is nice when your opponent's played lots of units on one row. This is going to be able to hit the Alpha Werewolf. Next up, we have Abaya. Abaya has Thrive, so we know what that does, and it also triggers a Bronze Allied unit's Death Wish ability. So, if you have, say, a Harpy Egg or an Arcaspore on the board, then you play Abaya, you can then target it with Abaya and trigger the Bronze the ability, but that doesn't kill the unit. So if we have an egg on the board, we play Abaya on the egg, then we will gain a Harpy. A Harpy will get spawned and summoned to the row, so that will appear on the row. However, the egg will still remain on the board, so then we can then later on, say, consume it with the Sino Harpy. Hopefully that makes sense. Next up, we got Thunderbolt. When we play this on the board, this doesn't have any power. This is an artifact, so artifacts are cards that you play onto the board but don't have any power, as opposed to something like Lacerate, which is a spell, and spells, you play them and they do something. So like this deals 5 damage. This damages all units on a row. This you play onto the board, and it has Zeal. Zeal means that you can trigger the order on the turn that is played. Usually when you play a card and it has an order, you have to wait 1 turn in order to then trigger it. So you would play the unit, and then on the turn after, you would do whatever it says. But with Zeal, you can do it on the turn that you play it, and what this will do is boost an allied unit by 3, which is quite nice if you're trying to find, say, dominance for your Wild Hunt Riders. Then we have Ozril. Ozril, if you play it on the melee row, consumes a unit from your opponent's graveyard. If you put it on the range row, consumes a unit from your graveyard. So you could be eating those Ice Giants, for example. But also, you have this card here, Old Spear Tip, which is a gold card worth 9 value. And Ozril can eat gold cards as well as bronze cards. So ghouls only eat bronze cards and only eat from your graveyard. Ozril eats gold cards as well and eats from either graveyard. So if you've played the Old Spear Tip, you can then eat it with the Ozril later on. Last but not least, we have Geralt of Rivia. Destroy an enemy unit with 9 or more power. So this is an interesting card. It's in every starter deck. So when you're playing against the starter decks, you do want to think about how you play your cards in such a way that, are you giving your opponent a target? Because if Geralt, if there's no unit with 9 or more power, then Geralt is just 3 points, right? And occasionally it is worth mulliganing Geralt if you don't think your opponent is going to play anything big enough for Geralt to have a target. So that's just worth being aware of. But those are the cards in the starter deck. What I'm going to do now is jump into a game of Gwent, and I'm going to showcase these cards and how they interact. And if you do find this video useful, maybe hit that like button.
Pride is all we've left.
Okay, so here we are in our mulligan screen. If you mouse over this icon on the top, you can see that your opponent is playing Invigorate, which is the Scoia'tael, one of the Scoia'tael abilities. It's going to boost all units in their hand by 1, so all of their units will become +1. It's not too bad. In terms of the mulligan here, we don't want 2 Wild Hunt Riders, but we also don't really want ghouls, because these consume from the graveyard, and at the moment we don't really have units in our graveyard. We're going to take a risk. We could get a second Wild Hunt Rider here by mulliganing the ghoul, but it paid off. And do consider that when you're doing your mulligan. If you have a chance of getting a second one, sometimes it's wiser not to take the mulligan.
Got a hearty hankering for Gwent.
Okay, so our opponent has played a Mahakam Marauder. Mahakam Marauder, when you play it, it gains Vitality for 2 turns. Vitality boosts the unit by 1 at the end of his turn. And Bonded means that if there's a unit of the same kind on the board, then gain that instead. So if he played another Mahakam Marauder, it would have Vitality for 4 turns, which is a little bit overwhelming. As it is with the current state of the hand, I think what we want to do here is just play our Neckers and get our little Necker friends onto the board like so, in order to start gaining some value from the thrives. The tricky part here is because our opponent has the tactical advantage. Tactical advantage allows you to boost an allied unit by 5 if you're going first. Because our opponent, at this point, for example, we have 9 cards and they have 9 cards, but they have to play before we do, which makes life a little bit more difficult. Oh, this is tricky. So they've played Pavko. Pavko, you play it on the range row, and it will damage a unit by 1. But if there's only Scoia'tael units on the board, which there are, these are only Scoia'tael units, it's going to deal 2 damage instead. So this is really not something that we particularly want to see here. But what we could do here is we could play Spear Tip. Because we have Osril, we want to get Spear Tip into the graveyard, and Spear Tip is also a target for Geralt of Rivia. So if we're worried about Geralt of Rivia, then really what we could do this round is just play the Spear Tip, especially as at the moment, given the state of the board, it looks like we're unlikely to win this round because we don't have answers to some of the problems. See, he can get 2 points per turn. So I think it's okay to do this. Also, by playing the Spear Tip, it means that we have the largest unit on the board at the moment. And if our opponent doesn't use their tactical advantage, then that will stay the case. Yep, so we still have the tallest unit on the board, which means we can play these Wild Hunt Riders, or play one of them, and it'll pull the other one out of the deck. If our opponent had used the tactical advantage on one of their own units, one of these 2, it would have then enabled our Geralt of Rivia, so we would have seen value from that instead. So all in all, I think this isn't too bad. So I'll have to wait and see how it is our opponent chooses to play. You'll notice that they haven't used their leader ability yet, the Invigorate. You don't necessarily have to use this ability in round 1. You can choose to kind of save it for later, and that's a totally valid strategy. With that said, I mean, we still have the tallest unit on the board. We are 10 points behind, but we can catch them up in a couple cards if necessary. So I'm wondering if now, while we still have this dominance effect, we should play our Wild Hunt Navigator in order to get some value there. The other thing we possibly want to do is play an Ice Giant to get that into the graveyard so that we have things that we can eat with the ghoul. It's a little bit tricky. The thing is, if we lose this round, it means that most likely our opponent will have Last Say. Last Say means they'll play the last card on the game, which means if we do get a big unit, say with Osril, the Geralt of Rivia is going to be able to kill it, which is pretty bad. And we're starting to get the point here where it is going to be quite difficult for us to maybe catch up into. Although, at the moment, still possible. We have the Harpy Egg and the Abaya combo, but we don't necessarily have a consume for the egg. If we do play the egg, however, and then use the Abaya, that's going to be 9 points, 10, 11, 12. Plus, we have the Carapace as well, the ability. So even though we can see this bonded effect triggering, I think we should still be able to catch up. So let's play down the egg here. And also, it's just good to play bronze cards and try and get ahead of our opponent. The other thing, when you're playing against Philavandrel, or Invigorate, sorry, the abilities used to be based on leaders, just if that's slightly confusing. But the thing about playing against Invigorate is the more cards our opponent plays here, the less value they're going to get out of their leader ability. because they're going to draw into fewer cards. So this is actually quite nice for us. And also, we don't have bad cards necessarily. The Ozreal isn't great because we don't have anything to consume. But the Ice Giant, you know, that's a 7-point play. The Abaya is also a pretty big play. Our opponents then play Dwarven Agitator, which is going to boost a dwarf in their hand by 2. So let's play this Abaya. Abaya also has Thrive, which is nice, and we'll trigger the Death Wish of the egg and get another 5. The scary thing here, we maybe should have played this on the front row in order to spread our units out a little bit. That probably would have been quite clever. But with that said, the state of the board isn't looking too bad for us now. And our opponent is starting to get to that point where they're really going to lose out on their leader ability unless they pass soon. But if they pass, they're giving us last say. And having last say as monsters is quite important if you are worried about your cards. So I would imagine that this is the Fire Trap. And the way that this card works is it's going to flip over and deal 5 damage to the card that we play, which is a little bit unfortunate. So if we play this, it's only going to be a 2-point play, for example, which would mean we'd maybe have to use some leader abilities. If we had a Harpy Egg, we could just play the Harpy Egg, and then it would die and instantly become a Harpy, which would have been quite good. I think what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to play the Alpha Werewolf. Even though it has Thrive, it will still die from this, unfortunately, because this targets the next card played, so you can see it did still die. But all in all, the state of the board isn't really that bad for us because we can always play the Ice Giant, right? And that should catch us up. We can also use a leader charge, which we'll do now, to give ourselves a few more points. And it does mean that on the next turn, when we play the Ice Giant, we will be comfortably ahead. And it is maybe just worthwhile here kind of bleeding our opponent and getting more and more cards out of them. The more cards they play, like I said, the fewer points they'll have from their leader because they chose to save it, which is quite good for us. Opting to use the ability here means that you're going to play a card. You can't use an ability that's on the board and then pass. If you use an ability, you have to also play a card. So this is not too bad either. The only kind of big problem that we have, to a certain extent, is it would have been good for us if this had gone to a 9 rather than an 8. So if we play the 7, we'll get 1 Thrive trigger. So that'll put us on +8, which puts us on 32. Our leader ability isn't going to quite put us ahead. But what it does do is it makes it so that our opponent may have to pass. There we go. And if our opponent does pass, what we can do here is we can just play Geralt of Rivia. It may be the case that we don't have a target for Geralt, and that does happen quite often. As it is, though, our opponent continuing to play cards. But we really haven't played too many cards. We've played Abaya, and we've played Spear Tip. Admittedly, they've only really played Bronze, but they have played quite a lot of cards. So I think what we'll do here is we will pass. The other thing to be aware of is the Skirmisher here, you'll notice, has 4 strength. And the Dwarven Agitator boosted a dwarf in their hand by 2. So we know that the Dwarven Agitator boost has gone on to the Skirmisher, because Skirmishers are typically 1. When they deal damage, they boost by 1, but he's boosted up to 4, so he's got 2 extra points. So that is worth being aware of. Bit of a tough round for us, in all honesty. We didn't quite have the hand to allow us to, you know, maybe do exactly what it is we wanted to do. We have an egg. We have an Alza's Thunder. We need something to play this round if our opponent does just pass, which I think is going to be the Navigator. I'm going to mulligan the Harpy Egg because we don't have a consumer. Ghoul is really nice. Ghoul is a pretty good card for us to have. So I think this hand is okay. You know, I have some cards that I want in order to cause my opponent some troubles. I have some decent, you know, options to play here because our opponent did just choose to pass. The reason for that is they won the first round with 1 fewer card than us. They were down on 4, we were up on 5. So we can just play the Navigator here, which I would say is probably the least value card in our hand. And then we'll go from there. And now we can pass. It does mean we have to go first, but I think we can also just try and play around Geralt a little bit. Okay, so we got another giant, which is good. We've got a consume, and we've got a consume target, which is also really good. The only thing we would have to be a little bit cautious of is our opponent playing a trap. So if we expect our opponent to play a trap, we can use the egg to just kind of trigger the trap, which is pretty good. So I think I'm just going to work with this hand. I think the hand is honestly pretty okay. In terms of how we want to play this, the reason we kept Geralt, sometimes it is worth mulliganing Geralt if we don't think that we're going to have a target, but chances are our opponent's going to have a, I think they're called a Mahakam Defender, but there's a dwarf where if it's boosted, which they can do by boosting it with their Invigorate, every turn it gains 1 point. And so if they play that card, then by the time it hits 9 points, we should then be able to kill it with Geralt of Rivia, so that is pretty nice. So for now, we're just going to play down our Ice Giant and get a unit there on the board. If I expect them to play a trap, then what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to play around that. But for now, I would expect if they have that dwarf, we will see the dwarf played on the board. There it is, Mahakam Defender. Every allied turn, on turn end, boost up by 1. So this is fine for us. Honestly, not really a problem. So for now, I think what we'll do, just looking at the state of the graveyards and stuff, maybe there's a good target in our opponent's graveyard. There is a 5. If I want to play around Geralt, then what I want to do is I want to eat things of 7 and below. So if we eat the Ice Giant here, there we go. We're up to 8, which is quite good. And we'll have to see if they do have a trap that they want to play. So not hitting that 9-point mark. And this is going to be a 7 on the next turn, then an 8 on the next turn, and then on the turn after that we'll be able to kill it with Geralt. So that's pretty nice. Okay, so our opponent's chosen to deal some damage there. I am just a little bit worried about there being more traps. So I think all I'm going to do for now is just play the Alzur's Thunder on the Elven War Dancer and just remove that. If I expect my opponent to play a trap, then I need to sequence this in such a way that we have the Harpy Egg in hand when necessary. Which may mean that we need to play Osriel on the next turn.
Let the dance begin.
Okay, so I think if my opponent kills the Ice Giant, it does actually give us a good target for Osriel. And maybe they don't have a trap. It may be that they chose to mulligan the trap because of the state of their hand. So if that's the case, we can, in fact, play the egg now. This is a little bit tricky in terms of how we want to sequence this. I think I'm going to play the egg. Because I do want to play the consume, right? And I want to eat the egg. The issue that we have is if our opponent has a second trap. I'm not sure if the starter deck has a second trap or not, but if it does, then we could have a bit of an issue. Okay, so this has now hit that 9 points of value, which is pretty good for us. So let's play our Harpy. We can actually play this on the next turn, but let's play our Harpy. I'll put it here. Eat this egg. Yum, yum, yum. Eggs are a really good source of protein, and you can see we got a little baby Harpy there. We are ahead 2 points, but they do have an extra card on us. We do have a leader boost, though, so we have an extra 3 points here, which is quite nice, and our Geralt of Rivia is going to be worth a whopping 12 points, so it's a pretty good play in this situation. Okay, so they're just using Milen to deal value. And I think now is the time for us to play Geralt and deal some damage, like so. So pretty good, all things considered. We have a Osriel, which we can consume. If my opponent plays a trap, what we can choose to do is we can just use Osriel to consume the largest unit in the graveyard, right? If that was something that we were worried about. But I think what we actually want to do here is rather than consuming this 9, because I do think if they have Geralt that's bad, and it's quite likely, then maybe what we should do instead is consume the 5. It gives us 6 points, plus our leader. I think it's pretty good, right? So we'll play this on the melee row. To eat from our opponent's graveyard, we'll eat the 5. We will then use our leader ability here on one of these units to stop them from being a 9. And there we go, we are at 30 points. So is our opponent's last card Geralt? It is! Look at that, and it's a 4-point play because of the boost, plus the 1 vitality, and that was nail-bitingly close. Ooh, that was a close one, you guys, but because I understood the sort of cards my opponent has, I was able to play around them, even though they had the last say. What that meant was, you know, because I ate that 5 instead of the 9, we won that game, and that was the reason that we won, which is pretty exciting. But that is the basic starter deck, but this deck can definitely get better. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the deck builder and I'll show you guys my improved version of the starter deck while spending less than 400 scrap to do it. Okay, so that is us back in the deck builder, and you may have noticed we have changed our ability. So previously we had Carapace, and now we have Fruits of Isgith. What this does is you spawn a Gurnicor's fruit on an allied row, and a Gurnicor's fruit is a 1 strength unit which has Thrive. And what Thrive does is it boosts by 1 whenever you play an ally. So it's the same as a Necker, but you can create one. However, if this for some reason is removed from the board, then at the start of your turn, so on your next turn, the ability will refresh, so you can do it again. So if the fruit dies, you can create a new fruit. And this doesn't necessarily sound super useful to begin with, but the thing is there's lots of different ways that you can play this, and also just having that extra Thrive is really helpful. So one of the things you can do with this is it allows you to play Griffin. Griffin is an 8 strength unit, and when you play this, you destroy an allied unit on the row. Right? If there's no targets, destroy self. That's bad. But when you can play a fruit onto the row, you can then destroy the 1 strength fruit, and then on the next turn, because your leader ability will refresh, make another one. And then you have a nice 8 strength bronze unit in your graveyard, which is good for eating with the ghoul. So not too bad. Next thing I want to point out here is we do now have Dargaray of Vol. This is a starter card, so everyone should have it, and it's neutral, so you can play it in any faction. What this does is it locks a unit. Locks will disable a unit's ability. So, for example, if your Harpy Egg was locked, then the Death Wish would no longer trigger because the Death Wish is the unit's ability. So, other cards we have in this deck now, we have Predatory Dive. Each player destroys their lowest unit, and this is the spell. And bear in mind, if your opponent goes first and they play a unit, and then you play Predatory Dive, you have no units on your side of the board, so there's nothing to destroy, but your opponent's unit will still be destroyed. However, if it's maybe partway through the round, and there's going to be a problem, bear in mind you do have your Fruits of Isgith, so it could be the case that you may want to, wait a turn and then play your Fruits of Isgith plus the Predatory Dive, so get that 1 strength unit on the board. The Predatory Dive kills your 1 strength unit and their lowest unit, so not too bad. Next up, we've got some more Thrive. So I do think the deck could do with a little bit more Thrive. And Thrive, obviously, you want to play like your 1 strength Neckers and then maybe your, 3 strength Egg, and you're progressively going up. So what's really good is we've added this 2 strength Thrive unit, which can also move an enemy unit to the other row and damage it by 2. And this will stop row effects. So some cards only work if they're on a certain row. So if you move them to the other row, you can stop this from happening. Plus, it's got 2 damage, which is pretty nice. So you could maybe play your Neckers, then you play your 2 strength Drowners, and all your Neckers get boosted, plus perhaps your Fruit. And then you could play your Wyverns, which have 3 strength and also have Thrive. But these you want to play on the range row. When you do, you'll damage an enemy unit by 2. And so then you've played your 3s, and then you could maybe play your Alpha Werewolf, your 4s, then think about playing, something that's worth 5. Although Solano Harpy, bear in mind, is not actually a 5 because it also consumes. So it's actually worth more than a 5. So when you're looking at Thrives, Solano Harpy will be considered the point at which it boosts. So if, say, your Neckers were at a 6 and you played a Solano Harpy, an 8, an Egg, the Solano Harpy is going to be at an 8, so that would still trigger the Thrive effects. And, yep, that's more or less the deck. These are some pretty cheap changes. We have only spent 340 scrap to make these changes, but it does make the deck a little bit better, in my opinion. So let's jump into a game now, and I'll show you guys the improved Monsters starter deck. Okay, so this time we are up against Skellige, and they have Onslaught. They can damage an enemy unit by 1 on cooldown of 2 turns, so every other turn they can deal 1 damage. In terms of the starting hand, we have a lot of Neckers. We have a couple Predatory Dives, which isn't too bad. I'm going to mulligan the Ghoul, because it's a card for kind of later on in the game. We have Spear Tip, we have a couple of Ice Giants. I think all in all, not looking too bad. 2 sets of Neckers is a little bit of a problem with Onslaught, because Onslaught, they can just kill your Neckers, right? If they're 1-point units, they are just going to kill them. So maybe we mulligan one of these. We got Geralt. And I'm going to stick with this hand, I think. It's not too bad. Okay, so we are going first. And a good opening play, I think, here is just to play some Neckers. we don't necessarily want to play our fruit. We can play our fruit on the next turn. And if we play it on the next turn, it will actually allow us to play Predatory Dive, should we want. Because what we can do is we can play our Neckers, play something larger to boost them up for Thrive, and then... well, sorry, on the turn after that, we can then play Predatory Dive. It just kind of depends on the state of the board. You can see the leader ability there was used to kill a Necker, which is unsurprising. If our opponent plays something that we really feel like we want to kill... this isn't too bad, honestly. Okay, so here is the play, I think. What we're going to do, we're going to play Fruits of Isgith to get our fruit. And then we're going to play Predatory Dive. This will die, which gives us 6 points of value. And then potentially the fruit will die, but maybe it'll be the Necker, right? Because we have 2 lowest units. I don't want to play my tactical advantage on the Necker to protect it, because if I boost it up to a 6, we're not really going to see the Thrive effect happen that much. Although we could do that and then play the Predatory Dive, and that would guarantee the death of the fruit. I think, you know what, let's do that. Why not? We don't really have anything else we necessarily need to protect, so time for a Predatory Dive. Both of the units are dead, and we end our turn. And so, yeah, this card is really nice with the Fruits of Isgith ability. There was no real reason to play a fruit in the first round, because you can always play it in the second round instead if they kill it. I guess it gives them a target, and sometimes you maybe don't want to give them another target, but if they're playing, you know, random effects, maybe it is worth giving them another target. It kind of depends a little bit. Okay, so the way that this boat works is it's going to deal 1 damage per turn, every turn, but it's also going to damage itself. And I think all in all, we're pretty much okay with that happening, right? So instead, I think what we're going to do here is spawn a fruit and then play our egg, which then triggers the Thrive effect on the fruit, gives us another point, which is quite nice. Now, our opponent may think, oh, I've got a charge on my longship, and I've got a leader ability, I can kill the fruit. But actually opting to lock the egg, which is a little bit of a shame, it means we can't get the value from the consume. And yet they're opting to kill the fruit. And I really wouldn't recommend killing the fruit, because if you kill the fruit, it's just going to boost again. I guess they didn't want to trigger the Necker, right? Because if they trigger the Necker, then I'm more likely to boost it with, say, a 6. So for now, I think we just play the Ice Giant, triggers our Thrives, gets a unit in the graveyard for our ghouls, which is quite good. And all in all puts us in a pretty nice position. Now, one thing about the Skellige starter list is it does like to have damaged units on the board. So playing this sort of list against it is quite good for us, because it's hard for them to get those units into the red if they're gaining points and getting boosted. So for example, this is a damaged unit, unsurprisingly. We could eat it. We do have the option of consuming it. And there you can see they've opted to hit the Harpy to try and, again, damage more units. But what we're going to do, we are just going to eat this egg. Even though we don't trigger the Death Wish because of the lock, by doing that, we are denying our opponent value in terms of damaged units, and that is pretty good. One card our opponent does tend to have is a card called Giant Boar, and that's going to boost based on the number of damaged units across the whole board, which means we should be able to see some okay Geralt of Rivia value, especially if we have that last say where we can, in fact, deal with it. So we'll have to kind of wait and see what it is that happens this round, and whether or not we do get last say. You know, it's not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination. But all in all, I think things are looking pretty okay. So it may be worth taking a risk here and opting to play the Spear Tip. If they have Geralt, they're going to see value from it. But if they don't have Geralt, then, you know, it's still a pretty big play. So I think I'm going to do that. It's a little bit risky, obviously, but, you know, I would rather do it now. And then if they have Geralt, then at least that gets played, than do it later on. On the downside, we've stopped being able to control how many damaged units are on our board to a certain extent, which is not ideal. We are, however, 16 points up on our opponent. So if they don't have Geralt, this could be a good time to pass. It depends on whether or not you think your opponent can catch you up in a couple cards. And actually, there was Geralt of Rivia, so not our lucky day, unfortunately. Not our lucky day. But what we'll do We'll pop down that next ice giant here. Get that on the board. And what we could do next is we could always play the Griffin and then eat the Solano Harpy. We can use the Griffin and destroy the Harpy, which is okay. It removes a damaged unit, but it also gets an 8 on the board for us, gets an 8 into our graveyard, and we no longer have to worry about that Geralt of Rivia ability. And that is actually really good for this deck. Okay, so there's the 3rd damage unit. So we're likely to see something happen here that has Bloodthirst. Bloodthirst being an ability that triggers based on the number of damaged units on your opponent's side of the board, so on my side of the board. I'm just thinking about it. Show me what you got. So there we go. Bloodthirst, it now boosted up to 5, but we do have the Geralt should we need it. But at the moment, you know, we don't actually need to play the Geralt. What we can just do here is we can play our Griffin. We can destroy our little 2 here. We still get 6 points plus 1 from the fruit is 7. And again, we have a nice healthy lead on our opponent. And if we really wanted to force out the round, Geralt is going to give us that option. And it does mean that, you know, going forward, there will be then shorter rounds. And I think actually it maybe is worth us playing into round 2, even though we'll be at card disadvantage, depending on our draws. Because at the moment we have 2 cards and our opponent has 3 cards. So if they pass, we will have 1 fewer card than them going into the next round. Oh, there's the boar as well. So really playing all of their cards. They're going to be a little bit cheeky. Let's do an emote here. Play down Geralt. Geralt, I'm going to put him on the back row. We will kill the Svanrigga. There we go. And our opponents notice that, you know, they don't think they're going to get good value from this boar going forward. So they may as well play it now. Which I think is pretty clever. Unfortunately, Predatory Dive is going to kill a 3 on our side of the board and a 3 on our opponent's side of the board. So not really the card that we would maybe want to play here. But we have 12 points on our opponent. They do have a leader charge, but they would still have to play 12 points to get ahead. And obviously decided that's not possible for them. So we'll take the pass here instead. Okay, so let's see how we drown. We got a draw. We got a Drowner, which is going to give us that Thrive ability. We got a Solano Harpy, which isn't really good without a consume target. So let's see if we can find that. Again, we're getting cards that deal damage, and we don't particularly want to play cards that deal damage onto an empty board state. We did get double Ghoul, though. So if we were looking to push our opponent, this is actually not a bad way to do it. So maybe what we should do for now, if we want to try and get them to play a few more cards, is... Oh, we could just pass. I mean, we can open with Predatory Dive. I think we're okay to do it. You know what? Let's do it. Let's play a fruit. Let's play our melee ghoul. And let's eat. Should we eat a 7 or should we eat an 8? I think we'll just eat a 7 for now. I want to keep the option of that 8 for later on. And if we eat it, then obviously that's going to be harder. But that does put 10 points on the board. And these are boosted units, right? So that's pretty good for us. This is what we call like a tempo play. You know, we've played a decent number of points in 1 turn. And it's unlikely our opponent will be able to catch us up in 2 cards. And if our opponent can't catch us up in 2 cards, then we won't lose our... We won't end up at a disadvantage in terms of number of cards in the next round. So maybe what we play next is just the Wyvern. And then after we've played the Wyvern, we could pass. I'm not really worried about this boat. They resurrected it there with Freya's blessing from the graveyard. So let's play this Wyvern here. Damage the boat by 2. Trigger the Gurnakora's fruit. And then we'll see what's what with our opponent. Just kind of having a little look at what we can draw. Just to make sure we're kind of making the smartest choices that we can. And there is a Herbalist. Okay, so this is definitely our pass. We managed to get a few cards out of them. This actually, because we damaged the Demon there, this actually gave them value on the Heime Herbalist. But, you know, at some point you're going to probably have to damage their units. I'm not unhappy with this situation. We have a Ghoul, which is really good. And we have a Predatory Dive, which I think is really good. So, should see a pass here. I can't imagine they would use the leader ability when they don't need to. Because if they don't use it this turn, it'll carry across to the next turn. Now we want to draw Osriel. Abaya, we need a Death Wish for. None of these are a Death Wish. Okay, so let's mulligan the Harpy, Lacerate. And we have to mulligan the Abaya simply because we just don't have a target. And there's a Drowner, which is a little Thrive unit. The hand is not ideal for a short round, but it's not terrible. What we can do here is we can just play Predatory Dive and kill the Ancrate Longship, which is nice for us because obviously with the Ancrate Longship, it's kind of a little bit of a problem. And they did in fact resurrect it. However, this does go on the melee row, so if we want to counter this, what we can do, spawn a fruit, play the Drowner, and move that unit to the range row, which means that its ability no longer triggers. The only issue we have here is drawing the Lacerate this late is kind of bad. You know, if we had that in an earlier round where there's going to be a lot of units, we'd probably see okay value out of it. But here, I feel like we're unlikely to see more than 4 value. Okay, so they did manage to heal that up and then damaged our Drowner. The problem here is, I guess if we play the Griffin, it's going to kill the Drowner, but I guess it doesn't really matter, right? You know, if we kill the Drowner, it would be the kind of similar to killing a fruit. Still gives us a decent amount of value. This is worth 9 points. This is currently worth 4 points. You know, what is it that our opponent has that's maybe worth that many points? We'll have to wait and see. Okay, so Donner damaged by 2. Still a 7-point play, which is not too shabby. But, it's not quite a Lacerate. The issue here is if they have a Lacerate, and we play this on the front row, we give them 6. And then we only get 2. But I still feel like... And Lacerate is a card in their deck, so maybe we just play the Lacerate now. Yeah, I'm going to just do that, I think. We've got 9 in hand. We're down a point, and they have 1 point on leader. Okay, so ping the fruit. What have you got? Oh, unfortunate. The Dimon Pirate Captain. Dimon requires Bloodthirst 2, and obviously only had 1 damaged unit, which was pretty bad for him. So unable to get any value there. And this is where the Thrive kind of does well against this deck. So let's eat the Griffin. Yum, yum, yum. Delicious Griffins for tea. And we can win the round. Not too bad. I think, like, we didn't draw exactly, the way we would want to with this deck in terms of having the Death Wishes when we needed Death Wishes and having the Thrives when we wanted Thrives. And that's kind of a problem with maybe having the deck's purposes split a little bit. So what you could do with this list is you could choose to add maybe a little bit more Death Wish or a little bit more Thrive, depending on, which of those you kind of enjoy more. In terms of adding more Thrive, a good option for that, and actually a good replacement for Necker, is the Endrega Larva. Because this card, you can see here, is a worm. Well, it's not a worm, it's a bug. And it has Thrive. When you play it, it spawns a base copy of this unit and summons it through. So it's the same ability as the Necker, but it also has 2 armor. And armor, what that does is it blocks damage. So this can take 2 damage and actually take no damage. So this makes them a little bit more survivable, which is pretty nice. In terms of other options for Thrive, we do also have the Necker Warriors that you could always, put into this deck should you wish. But I think if you're going to do that, you probably want to be taking out, things like the Abaya, Harpy Egg, Seleno Harpy package. Although if you want to go for more Death Wish stuff, and you maybe want to take out the... I already took out the Wild Hunt Riders, but you want to put in some thinning, I guess, then we do have the option of a Foglet. So here is a Foglet. And what a Foglet does is it has a Death Wish where it summons a copy of this unit from your deck to a random ally row. So if you trigger this unit's Death Wish, it will pull the second Foglet out of your deck. So it's kind of similar to the Wild Hunt Riders in that regard of, thinning out the deck, which is quite nice. In terms of golds you might want to craft, for monsters, if you're going for, say, a Thrive build, you want to get some of these big units. These big units you can put in the graveyard. You can consume them with Osriel. They'll boost up your Thrives. Things like Old Spear Tip here, although that is a legendary. And the other one you could use is Ighern, this worm friend. Bear in mind, though, that when you play this, it gains armor equal to the number of cards in your hand. So if you play this last, it gains no armor. And if the unit has no armor, it destroys itself. And also, if your opponent removes the armor by damaging it, it will die. However, this is also a nice card to play and then consume. say with something like the Seleno Harpy, because then you're putting those points onto the Harpy, you're putting the Acorn into the graveyard, which is going to activate your Osril. The last set of cards I want to talk to you guys about is the Crones of Brookbank Bog. We have Brewis, we have Weavis, and we have a Wispus. And these three kind of work in synergy, as you may imagine if you've played The Witcher 3. So we have Crone number 1, Brewis, Basket Head. She is one true waifu. And when you play her, she will consume one allied unit, but this increases the number of targets by 1. You increase the number of targets by 1 whenever you play a Crone. So if you've already played these 2 Crones, this will allow you to play 3 units. And you don't have to do that in one round, just in the game. So let's say you play Brewis in round 1, you consume 1 allied unit, maybe an Acorn, which we were just talking about. Then in round 2 or round 3, we have then Weavis. And at that point, Weavis will have been boosted by 2. Because Weavis, what she does, she boosts an allied unit by 2. But because you've already played 1 Crone, that's going to go up. So it's going to actually increase the boost by 2. So you're going to boost by 4. If you played this other Crone as well, you'd be able to boost by 6. Similarly, we have Wispus, damage an enemy unit by 2. Increases damage by 2 whenever you play a Crone. So if this is the first Crone you play, it does 2 damage. If it's the second Crone you play, it does 4 damage. If it's the third Crone you play, it does 6 damage. And typically, you usually want to play Brewis first because you don't need too many consumes. And then these 2 cards are going to get better going forward, which is pretty nice. So the Crones, I think they're a nice little monsters package, and you can fit them into any deck, which I think is, important when you're looking at which cards you do want to craft. So yeah, that's about it in terms of the Monsters starter deck. If you like this video, maybe hit that like button and let me know how you're getting on in the comments below. I'll also have a link to the Team Leviathan Gaming Discord channel. They are a Gwent team. So if you have any questions maybe concerning, what keg should I pick, or what card should I pick from a keg, or how can I make this deck better, that is a really great community to help you guys out. Really friendly and awesome, so do check that out. Beyond that, have an awesome day. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, maybe leave a like. You can find me streaming on Twitch, twitch.tv/Jaggerous, and on Twitter @Jaggerous. Try and be good. If you can't be good, don't be bad. And hopefully I'll catch you in the next video.